Hey everybody, what's up? Just out here in the office today working on lake map breakdowns for Fish the Moment, and probably like you guys are right now, just cussing this cold weather. Man, it is just gripping the entire country, isn't it, right now? I think they said like 240 million people are affected by this as far as, the super cold freezing weather. And man, here in Missouri, it has just been brutal. We have got most of the lakes are, half of them are frozen over as far as half the lakes go. Most all the creek arms, most all the cove arms. And, it's probably going to get worse as the week goes on. And we got our first tournament coming up the first week of March. So I'm hoping everything will get thawed out by then. But hey, what I wanted to talk about today was just, pertinent to what everybody's going through right now. This extreme frigid, abnormal, weather pattern that we're in right now. And the question is what is it going to do to the bass? How are these fish reacting to it right now? And more importantly, how are they going to react to it when you can basically get out there and start fishing again? Because here in Missouri, you just can't fish right now. I mean, it's right now, I think it's like 0 or 2 below zero. So I don't even think you could launch a boat. So, but it's going to change. It's supposed to warm up into the 30s this weekend, and we're getting close to March. So this is just temporary. It's going to change. But the question remains, and what I wanted to do today is sort of give you guys some tips on what to expect after you have just an abnormally super cold period in the wintertime like this. Because this is not like, not typical. It happens once in a while. And I think the first of all, I'm going to sort of go through a couple things that might help you out as far as where you can start looking for them once you do get out on the water soon, the next time you do. First of all, the bass are not going to react to this the same way that people are. So I think a lot of times we get into this mind frame, in this mindset that, because we feel a certain way we're on the water, that the bass may feel the same way, and they simply don't. I mean, bass do not react to cold weather the same way that we do right now. I mean, they've got so many options. They can go deep, they can get away from it. It's just not that big of a deal to them. The main thing that you have to remember moving forward when you do get out on the water in the next week or so is the fact that the bass are going to be paying more attention to the time of the year instead of the water temperature that they have right now. The time of the year is going to be the biggest factor as far as determining where these bass are going to be and to the degree of aggressiveness they have. And what's going to surprise a lot of people, as soon as you start getting this ice melting, and as soon as you start getting back on the lake, these bass are going to be biting right off the bat. I can't tell you how many days that I've fished up, particularly like up on Stockton Lake that gets a lot of ice, where you'll have ice in the coves, like half the coves is completely iced over, and there's floating ice chunks everywhere, and you're still catching fish, and you're still catching fish like in less than 10 feet of water. So the main thing is don't let the ice, intimidate you to think these bass are going to be inactive and hard to catch. What's going to happen is when you do get out on the lake, it doesn't matter if your lake's iced over or not. I'm talking about when we get out of this super cold snap, is these bass are going to start relating to more vertical structures, but they're going to be shallower. And the first thing that they do, when it starts to get like to March, or like it is March right now, is you start to get a population of the bigger bass, like the 3 to 5 pound bass, that will start to move like anywhere between 1/3 to halfway back into the major creek arms. And they start setting up on the steepest banks that are in this particular area. And it just depends on the type of cover that you have in the lakes you fish as far as the rock composition. But the one thing that I would suggest is to go back into the creek arms and start looking for your channel bends, some of the areas that, have steeper banks, deeper water right off them, and start fishing those banks super tight, parallel to the bank. I don't care if the water visibility is 1.5 feet or 10 feet. You just have to adjust your techniques. If you get into those areas and you've got stained water, say that 2 foot zone visibility, get in tight to that bank and start throwing like a crawfish pattern crankbait, a flat-sided crankbait, maybe even slow roll spinnerbait vertical to those banks. And as the water gets clear, or if you're in a lake that's got a little bit clear water, stay parallel to those banks, but just move out a little bit off them and get out into that, say, that 5 to 12 foot zone. and fish those banks parallel with things like Alabama rigs and jerk baits and even some deeper diving crankbaits. That's going to be the first thing that they do as far as once you get back out there after these super cold snaps. And you'll be surprised about how active the fish are, and it's gonna be good. I mean, that's one of the things about it. When you can first get back out on the lake after a super cold snap, there's usually always, a fresh bunch of quality fish to be caught in these type of areas. And a lot of it also depends just on the type of lake that you're fishing as far as geographically how it's set up. If you have a lake that has a little bit flatter terrain, maybe like some of the areas on, like, say, like the lower end of Lake Hartwell, for example, where you have long flat points, those fish will do the same thing, except they tend to suspend a little bit, but they still get into that zone where they're a little bit more catchable. They start to suspend a little bit shallower than they did during the heart of the winter. But the main thing that I want to stress to you guys right now is this temperature shock that we have right now is shocking us more than the fish are. The fish are just fine right now, and they're not going to react to it the same way that you think they will react to it. Like I said, the biggest motivation for the fish is the increased daylight hours. The daylight's getting longer every single day. Bass have an internal clock within them that they get up and they start staging in these areas, getting ready to spawn. They're starting to form their egg sacs. They're not like getting ready to look for beds, but they're starting to move out of their winter patterns into the pre-spawn patterns, even right now in the super cold water. And once they start staging in those pre-spawn areas, that's when they're highly catchable. And that's a lot of times when you catch some of your biggest bass of the year is in this, mid-February to mid-March time frames. It's one of my favorite times of year to fish. So anyway, just a few tips to help you out here, guys. Like I said, the biggest thing to take away from this is two things. Like I said, go to your steeper banks and your creeks. Concentrate on those areas after this super cold snap. And don't be intimidated by this super cold weather thinking the fish aren't going to bite, because they're going to be biting. So anyway, hope you guys are doing good, staying warm, and we'll be back tomorrow with another tip. See you.